If you're here, you want to talk about supply chain security. I'm going to put a public sector spin on that. By way of introduction, my name is Dan Moch. I am a staff software engineer at Lockheed Martin, where I work with the Open Source Program Office, among other things. Software supply chain security, obviously very important to us, increasingly important to the public sector as well. In my sort of corner of the public sector in defense and aerospace, of course, we have some executive orders around SBOMs and so forth that we have to increasingly sort of adhere to. So we are excited to sort of participate with you all in developing that ecosystem. I'm going to talk about three challenges that are, if not unique to the public sector, at least have a sort of unique threat or unique sort of risks, right? A risk profile, an enhanced risk profile in the public sector, we'll say. So I'll discuss those three challenges in brief, and then I will make three. I picked the word recommendations here. I've gone back and forth on whether requests might be a better word. I will let you decide. So to start with the challenges, number one is exposure. If you read the Black Duck risk analysis report, the open source risk analysis report, 97% of commercial code bases contain open source. That would include folks operating in the public sector as suppliers, of course, and so that number is relevant. Also relevant is the number of open source components that you'll see in the average commercial code base. As of this year, Black Duck pegs that number at 911. That number looks pretty big to me. I know it varies from one language ecosystem to another what a big dependency tree is, but I will say 911 does look like a big number to me. Important to note that a vulnerability in any of those components might present significant risk. Now that's not unique, obviously, for folks operating in the public sector. What is unique is what those risks mean. What are we risking by leaving ourselves exposed and not upgrading or updating or mitigating vulnerabilities in our code bases? Exploitation may put lives in jeopardy. Okay, if we're talking about a nation's power grid, any software that might be automating or powering that very important part of our nation's infrastructure, a cyber attack in midwinter may put people's lives in jeopardy, right? So the risks are important. They're always important, but they're especially important in situations where people's lives are at stake. Another thing that we deal with in the public sector is identification. We are, as suppliers to the government, subject to a number of compliance regimes, okay? A big one for us in defense and aerospace would be NIST SP 863, which regulates how a person proves their identity. So when anyone hires in to my company, they have to go through a proofing process, probably not that much more onerous than any other employer, but it is intentionally mapped to this standard to prove identity. Now, when you move out to the open source, of course, we don't have those standards, and we don't expect to reasonably hold open source maintainers to any of these standards. They are more than just proving ownership of an email address, which tends to be the way we correlate identity in the open source space. You think of what it takes to register an account on GitHub. So there's a bit of a disconnect there. Is there anything we can do to address that collectively? And then the third challenge would be approval timelines. Now, again, I spoke earlier this week about air gaps, disconnected networks. Many of those networks there are sort of gatekeepers that decide what is allowed on that network and what is not allowed on that network, right? These are the security teams that are responsible. So what does a security team do if I want to move a new open source component, or really any software component, onto their network? They have to approve it or deny it before it can go there. So what does that process look like? What are the hoops that a piece of software is going to have to jump through, or that I'm going to have to jump through as somebody wanting to move it into that network? What happens? The truth is, I don't know. I don't know what happens. This is obviously important work that's going on, but I think it's driven largely by bespoke processes, a lot of Excel spreadsheets, and so forth. I think more mature security organizations are certainly checking for known vulnerabilities in any software component that we want to bring onto these networks. But there's no best practice, okay? The way this is done is there's as many different approaches to it as there are networks at the moment. And that those processes on a given network are based on things like history, tribal knowledge, and as I said before, plenty of spreadsheets. And these things take a lot of time. Now, I'm going to quote a number here. 6 to 18 months is the timeline I'm used to seeing to get software approved to move into an air-gapped network, particularly say a classified one. That number, that's too high. That looks too high to me, right? Now, I did hear of a team that has got that down to about 2 weeks, but as far as I can tell, they've put a lot of effort into that, and so I do make exception for the most forward-looking security teams here. So those approval timelines, that's a challenge that we face, right? Now let's take a look at again what I'm calling recommendations, asks, requests, whatever you'd like to say here. Number one, provide S3C artifacts. Provide software supply chain security artifacts. I know there are a lot of other folks saying that. I am not by any means the first, but I am going to add my voice to that chorus. And what am I asking for specifically? The ones that I like: SBOMs, VEX data, and SALSA attestations. And I'm also asking that these get tied into in-toto when feasible. Now that's kind of comes for free with SALSA, which is an in-toto attestation by default. I also know that SBOM, there's a group, SBOMit, that is trying to sort of merge SBOMs into in-toto. I'm not aware of anything going on with VEX at the moment, but that doesn't mean there isn't. These are artifacts that are really helpful to us, right? Why are they helpful to us? Well, they provide a lot of contextual information, and that contextual information can help security teams make informed decisions if they're going to admit something onto a network. They also provide a measure of standardization, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, but of course those standard formats would give us a fighting chance of standardizing practices, standardizing tooling around those practices, and that would further assist getting those approval timelines down, hopefully even shorter than 2 weeks. I will spotlight SALSA. I'm very bullish on SALSA. I think they're doing a lot of great work. The build track is out there. The source track is coming. And then there are other ones as well. They have a dependency track that is sort of in the works. I guess really, if I'm going to say anything about this chart, I just want to make the point, like, pursue SALSA level 3 if you can, right? This is, I think, fairly easy to do if you're working in GitHub using their workflow. There are workflows that are sort of pre-canned for you that can get you a SALSA level 3 attestation. My next recommendation is to publicize best practices. Okay, we have a lot of work that's gone into the tools and I've just named some of them. What I haven't seen that much is folks talking about how are we using all these tools together to secure our supply chains. I believe that adoption is happening, and that adoption is important, but when we're talking about the public sector, we need to work with governments to get these policies created so that we're all sort of playing on the same field here. Governments need standard policies. Those policies sort of evolve from well-known best practices. And so I'm asking you all to sort of publicize what those best practices are. That'll sort of put this group in the, if not in the driver's seat, at least to have a voice at the table when the government says we need to standardize. Tell the world how you're using your artifacts, how you're generating them, how you're using them, what you're doing with them, all of it. Also, keep in mind that when the government does start creating policies, those usually have public comment periods. So if you're interested, by all means, review those proposals and comment on them when they happen. I don't have any to point you to at the moment. As I said, it's still early days, but those I expect will come. And then the last recommendation I have here is to systematically build trust. Okay, I spoke earlier about the way we do identification in the public sector. I understand that in the open source ecosystem, things are different. There are maintainers who won't identify themselves. They won't identify the nations maybe that they reside in, and there may be good reasons for that. So I'm not by any means proposing that change. And anyway, those questions of identity are, I think, a proxy for questions of trustworthiness. More important, the question behind the question, so to speak. Do we trust the folks who are building the code that we rely on? So are there other privacy-respecting ways of building trust? This is a wild sort of what if, but what if there was something like a GitHub stars for contributors? Could be a way to build trust there. I'm sure there are other, probably better ways to do it. I am not an expert in this by any measure. And that is all I had. So I think I have a few minutes for questions. Yes, I do. I got a question over here.
Test.
Could you say more on how getting to SALSA level 3 is easy?
I think in the case I mentioned of GitHub workflows, I'm going to say that a lot of that work has been done for you, right? You are trusting the builders that the team at GitHub are maintaining and allowing them to generate the artifacts, assign the artifacts for you. So as I said, those workflows more or less exist, and I believe they're fairly easy to use. Any other questions?
You were talking some about the 6 to 18 month lead time to get something approved. Have you ever seen cycles where packages, as part of their review, find CVEs, and by the time those get patched, then a new version comes out, the new version has CVEs, and so you find yourself in an endless cycle of never being able to get anything approved?
I have not personally run into that. I think security teams understand that they're running so far behind that unless something is really critical, they're maybe going to allow it, right? Fair question. I think there's, most security teams are going to have a gate on, say, the criticality score, right, or that they'll allow into a network. And then there may be a go back to sort of get a new one, an updated dependency submitted.
Maybe a follow-on question would be is, for folks who are using those packages in those isolated environments, how do they track when new packages become available? or how are people tracking CVEs when you're on a disconnected network?
So the best I've seen is that there's usually some version of, how do I want to say this? You'll have sensitive work going on in a disconnected network, right? Might be algorithms, might be data that we just don't want exposing on the public internet. There may be, and in the best case, there is some work happening in a connected network, right? And that would be sort of a staging area for bundling and pushing things up into the disconnected network. And since you're connected in that, sort of low side environment, as we call it, you have access to all the package managers and can run updates and repins and things like that fairly easily. If you can't do that, if you can't establish sort of a low side development staging area just because the entirety of what you're working on is perhaps sensitive, then yeah, you've got your hands full keeping up with that potentially.